Questions orales, oral questions. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Monsieur le Président, des travailleurs et des familles du secteur des ressources au Canada se sentent abandonnés par ce Premier ministre. Des milliers de Canadiens intelligents, travailleurs, et oui, des Canadiens pleins de ressources sont sans travail. Le Premier ministre a une chance de leur offrir de l'espoir en votant pour notre motion en appuyant l'énergie Est. Est-ce qu'il va faire la bonne chose et démontrer son appui aux travailleurs?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, every member of this House knows that there are Canadians who are suffering from job losses because of low commodity prices. They're suffering in Alberta, in Saskatchewan, in Newfoundland and Labrador, in New Brunswick. We need to establish a credible process that will have the confidence of Canadians. Mr. Speaker, the previous government from 2011 built no pipelines because the process was not credible. We are in a better position today, Mr. Speaker, than we were a week ago.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what's concerning is the Prime Minister's track record so far on these issues. Northern Gateway, of course, was approved with over 200 conditions, and the proponent was working to meet those conditions. But the Prime Minister killed it by unilaterally announcing a transportation ban off the West Coast. Why? Because he doesn't actually value these jobs. If Energy East and other projects do manage to get approved through this new process, how can he be trusted he won't politically interfere again and unilaterally kill more jobs?
I'm the Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that the honourable member brought up the matter of trust. And it was a lack of trust in the regulatory process under their regime that resulted in no pipelines built to Tidewater from 2011. We have consulted widely across the country and across sectors and across regions, and we believe that today we have a better chance of instilling confidence among Canadians than we had when they were running the show.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
And families in Canada's resource sector are feeling completely abandoned by this minister and by the Prime Minister. Tens of thousands of smart, hardworking, and yes, resourceful Canadians are out of work. The Prime Minister has a chance to offer those people some hope tonight. He can vote in favour of our motion to support Energy East. Will he do the right thing and show these people that he has their back?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, there will be hope when Canadians are faced with a regulatory regime that has their confidence. And that will only be done if we meaningfully consult with Indigenous communities, with industry, with environmental groups across regions of the country. With good process and with good regulatory controls, we have a much better chance of being where all of members of this House want to be, moving our resources to Tidewater sustainably.
Monsieur le Président, il est maintenant clair que le ministre des Finances vit dans un monde imaginaire en croyant qu'en dépensant plus, on s'enrichit. Pourtant, les Canadiens, eux, savent que ce n'est pas le cas et qu'il faut avoir absolument un budget équilibré. Est-ce que le ministre des Finances peut se ressaisir et convaincre son premier ministre de changer de cap et d'adopter une politique budgétaire rigoureuse et responsable et non pas en endettant les générations futures avec des déficits structurels?
L'honorable ministre des Finances.
Mr. Speaker, we committed to Canadians that we would put in place an approach to fiscal management that would be prudent and that would be responsible. We've told Canadians that we will reduce the net debt to GDP over the course of our mandate. We've told them that we will work towards a balanced budget during the course of our mandate. What we will do is we will make investments that will enhance the long-term productivity of our country to enhance Canada for all Canadians.
Yes.
L'honorable député de Beauce.
Monsieur le Président, les Canadiens savent que c'est seulement les entrepreneurs qui investissent et créent de la richesse et le gouvernement dépense de l'argent qu'on n'a pas. C'est ça que le ministre des Finances est en train de faire. Est-ce que le ministre des Finances va cesser de faire croire aux Canadiens qu'il a hérité d'un déficit parce que vendredi dernier, ses fonctionnaires lui ont bien dit qu'il a hérité d'un surplus de plus de 400 millions de dollars au mois de novembre dernier? Est-ce qu'il peut être franc avec les Canadiens une fois pour toutes et leur confirmer qu'il a hérité d'un surplus budgétaire?
L'honorable ministre des Finances.
Mr. Speaker, we released an economic and fiscal update in December which gave Canadians a transparent and clear understanding of where we stand. It showed that the 2015-2016 budget year looks to have about a $3 billion deficit, as opposed to the surplus that our predecessor government claimed might be in existence.
L'honorable député de Hochelaga.
Dans une entrevue diffusée hier, le premier ministre s'est fait demander par un employé qui avait perdu son emploi quel était son plan pour le secteur manufacturier. Mais le premier ministre n'a offert aucune réponse claire. Depuis 10 ans, c'est plus de 400 000 bons emplois qui sont disparus dans le secteur manufacturier au pays. Ce sont des travailleurs, des familles, des communautés qui sont directement touchées par l'improvisation du gouvernement. Est-ce que le premier ministre peut nous dire si oui ou non, il a un plan pour soutenir le secteur manufacturier?
The Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I can tell the member opposite that we will never, ever turn our back on the manufacturing sector. It represents 1.7 million jobs. It represents 10% of our economy, Mr. Speaker. And we're going to be putting forward a comprehensive innovation agenda that will really look to help create jobs in the manufacturing sector, Mr. Speaker, because it's an important part of our economy. It's an important part of our growth agenda, Mr. Speaker.
Député d'Hochelaga.
Président, les travailleurs comme Neil dans l'entrevue hier veulent des actions concrètes, un plan, savoir où on s'en va. Comment le premier ministre ne peut-il rien avoir de concret à dire? Le secteur manufacturier, c'est un pilier de notre économie. Et d'autres secteurs connaissent aussi des temps difficiles. Perte d'emploi la semaine dernière chez Transcontinental, chez Jean Coutu. Il est temps que le premier ministre écoute les travailleurs et fasse quelque chose pour eux. Il est où le plan du gouvernement pour les bons emplois?
The Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind the member opposite that we do have a plan. It's a plan that's focused on growth, Mr. Speaker. It's a plan that had the opportunity, for example, when it came to the automotive sector, to speak to the global heads in the OEM in Detroit. When we talked about how great this country is, the workforce that we have, the diversity that we have, the investments that we're making, Mr. Speaker, we have a plan on infrastructure, on helping the middle class, on innovation. These are important investments that will help grow the economy and create jobs from coast to coast to coast.
The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
Mr. Speaker, Neil from London asked the Prime Minister what he planned to do to bring back good jobs to our city. Like far too many, Neil lost his manufacturing job when his plant closed. It was a serious and important question. People are looking for help. But the Prime Minister had nothing but empty platitudes and no real plan to revive manufacturing jobs. That's simply not good enough. What will the government do to rebuild manufacturing jobs and help people like Neil?
The Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, we understand the plight and the challenges and the concerns Canadians are facing. That is why I'm very, very fortunate to work with great organizations like FedDev that have made commitments and investments in Southern Ontario, investments that will help create jobs, Mr. Speaker. I made an announcement with the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, to show us leadership in clean technology. When it comes to healthcare, Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to make these investments that will create good, meaningful jobs here in Canada, Mr. Speaker, for today and for tomorrow.
The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
But, Mr. Speaker, a year ago, the Prime Minister told Londoners to give up on manufacturing. It seems he's learned very little since. Neil had a good job and a pension before his plant closed. But as he nears 65, he has no savings and he's worried he will lose his home. And he's not alone. Millions of Canadians don't have enough to retire in dignity. While the Liberals are rushing to give billions in tax cuts to the wealthy, why are they delaying help for workers like Neil who need it the most?
The Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, again, the member opposite should know that we made very important investments through the regional development agencies to create jobs today and for tomorrow, Mr. Speaker. These investments will help people like Neil and others who are transitioning, Mr. Speaker. But more importantly, we have a plan to grow the economy. We did not run on austerity, Mr. Speaker. We ran on growth. And that's very, very important. The infrastructure investment that we're making, the Canada Child Benefit investment that we're making, the tax cut for the middle class, Mr. Speaker, all these are important measures to help grow the middle class and those that wanted to join it.
The honourable member for Portage Lisgar.
Mr. Speaker, here's a quote. Let me be very clear on Energy East. I am pro-pipeline. I am pro-Energy East. I'm going to be an advocate for St. John. I'm going to move forward whatever is best for our riding. Who said that? Well, it wasn't the Prime Minister. In fact, it was the Liberal member for St. John Rothsay. If the Liberal government will not support our motion tonight and stand up for jobs in the economy, will they at least allow their members to have a free vote like the member from New Brunswick and stand up and keep his word to his constituents?
The Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that there is no one in this House who speaks more clearly, more loudly, more passionately for the people from St. John as the member does, and we hear it all the time. There is no political party in this House that has a compassion, a monopoly on compassion. And I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure the member, that there are members of this caucus who understand that the best way that we will deliver to market is...
The honourable member for Portage Lisgar.
I'll take that as a no, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, in addition, this new government is putting roadblocks in the way of an already rigorous process under the National Energy Board. In fact, we've learned it's the Minister's office themselves that will be creating this new report. Decisions on pipelines will be based on who makes the most noise and who has the most influence in this cabinet. How can Canadians have any faith in this new process when the biggest consideration will be political influence with the Liberals?
Now the Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, we are determined to modernize the National Energy Board, and we will be asking Canadians from coast to coast to offer constructive opinions about how that can best be done. Those Canadians include members opposite, who you would think would have more of an interest than anybody else in a credible regulatory process.
The honourable member for Lakeland.
Government is all about political interference on pipelines. Canadians need a real leader and a government that represents all of us. Creating jobs and growth is not the priority when they fail to support Energy East and Canada's world-leading energy development. It's certainly not the priority of their Alberta MPs. Mr. Speaker, when will the Liberals stop undermining the energy sector and start supporting Canadian oil and Canadian jobs?
Good question. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, 20% of the national economy is dependent on natural resources. This is the way it's been in Canada for a very long time, and it will continue to be. And it is the aim of this government, and I'm sure every member of the House, to move our resources to market sustainably. We need a process to do it. We've announced that process. We believe that we have a better chance of achieving that common goal today than we did last week.
The honourable member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, as members of this House, our chief responsibility is to represent our constituents first and foremost. Yet, as Alberta loses tens of thousands of jobs, Liberal Alberta MPs remain silent on a shovel-ready, job-creating infrastructure project. The regulatory changes the government plans will only add red tape, time and cost, and delay critical infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, will at least one Alberta Liberal MP join me today and vote for Energy East?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, the delay under the former Conservative government was a permanent delay because there were no pipelines built between 2011 and October the 19th. And the reason is because the process was not credible. We know that these projects will not go forward unless it is. We're doing what we think is responsible by talking to Canadians about the ways in which they will have more public confidence in a system that didn't work under the former government.
Honourable member for Abbotsford.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are becoming very frustrated as they wait for this government to tell them what its climate change plan looks like and how much it will cost Canadian consumers and taxpayers. Last Friday, the minister met with her provincial and territorial counterparts in secret and then announced nothing. Simply that they had all met. No plan, no strategy, no economic assessment, not even a substantive progress report. To the minister, where's the plan and what happened to transparency?
Honourable Minister of Environment.
Mr. Speaker, I was very proud to meet with the Ministers of Environment from the provinces and territories. In fact, this was the first time in over a decade that we've had a meeting between time in over a decade that we'd actually met to talk about the challenges of climate change. And in fact, in showing transparency, we put out where our emission profiles are. We are now working very hard to develop a pan-Canadian plan so that we can tackle climate change and grow our economy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Abbotsford.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, the minister is quite incorrect. The ministers actually met last June 2015. And Mr. Speaker, in the lead up to the Paris Climate Change Conference, the Prime Minister dropped a bombshell on Canadians. He announced without warning and without a climate change plan that he will spend almost $3 billion of taxpayers' money on his own vanity projects, not here at home, but in foreign countries. In fact, last week in this House, the Minister had the gall to crow about that. Why isn't that money being invested in Canada, and where is the promised accountability?
Level Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for our shared concern about this global issue of climate change. And as such a global issue, it is important that Canada plays a leadership role so that we can invest in developing countries who share this problem, and we can work together so that we all have a better future. Thank you.
The honourable member for Essex.
Mr. Speaker, this week the Trade Minister plans to sign on to the job-killing TPP trade deal, even though the government has admitted it has no economic impact study. Would the minister sign a mortgage without knowing the interest rate? There are jobs on the line here, and Canadians will pay the price. My former co-workers in the auto industry and tens of thousands of others stand to lose their livelihoods under this Conservative negotiated deal. Will the government produce an economic impact study before signing any deal?
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for her question. The TPP was negotiated in secret by the previous government. The NDP criticised that treaty without even having read it. We promised during the course of the election campaign that we would study it. We are signing the agreement precisely to study it. We have consulted Canadians already. We are going to continue to consult through parliamentary processes, Mr. Speaker, and that's precisely the point of consulting Canadians.
Monsieur le Président, alors que l'économie va mal, c'est près de 60 000 emplois qui sont en jeu avec la signature du partenariat transpacifique. Nos producteurs laitiers, eux, vivent déjà dans l'incertitude. Le gouvernement n'a pas agi pour protéger notre système de gestion de l'offre, même après avoir promis d'agir, de s'attaquer aux problèmes des protéines laitières. Ils n'ont pas encore agi. Dans ce contexte, pourquoi le gouvernement va-t-il aller de l'avant et signer une entente qui va mettre en péril les emplois et aussi nos fermes familiales ici au Canada?
Honourable Ministre de l'Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government of Canada fully supports supply management, and the Government is engaged with the stakeholders on the outcome of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We will undergo the importance of compensation to the supply management sector. This government supports supply management, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable député de Louis Saint-Laurent.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Alors, Monsieur le Président, on sait que la semaine dernière, le gouvernement, dans la fameuse histoire du financement illégal par les syndicats, le gouvernement a dit que lorsqu'ils l'avaient su, ils avaient suivi la loi. Le problème, Monsieur le Président, c'est qu'ils oublient un détail. Et le détail...
Apparemment, l'interprétation ne fonctionne pas. Pour le moment, on va prendre un moment pour rassurer que ça fonctionne. Justement. Ah, ça fonctionne maintenant. On va essayer encore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. C'est une farce. C'est pas parce qu'on rit que c'est drôle, Monsieur le Président. Alors, ce que je disais de façon très intéressante, Monsieur le Président, c'est que la semaine dernière, le gouvernement nous a fait part que dès qu'ils ont été au courant du financement illégal des syndicats à leur endroit, ils ont suivi la loi. Le problème, Monsieur le Président, c'est que le gouvernement oublie un gros morceau de l'histoire. Dans un courriel que nous avons reçu, un courriel interne du syndicat, on apprend que c'est le Parti libéral, le chef du Parti libéral, l'équipe du chef du Parti libéral qui a demandé à tenir l'événement et que le syndicat identifie 25 personnes pour qu'ils soient près du chef libéral pendant l'événement. Alors, Monsieur le Président, on oublie un gros morceau de l'histoire. Wow. Est-ce que la ministre peut enfin reconnaître que le projet de loi C4, c'est la façon de dire merci à ceux qui ont fait du financement illégal?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Bill C-4 is going to reset labor-industrial relations to a fair balance, one that did not require an attack from the previous government to make it imbalanced. So what we're going to do is reset a fair, balanced network. After that, our economy should see significant improvements.
On a appris de Louis Saint-Laurent.
Nous, j'ai hâte de voir ça, Monsieur le Président, parce que la réalité, c'est que oui, il y a eu cet événement-là illégal. Il y en a eu d'autres, Monsieur le Président. À 2 reprises, le Parti libéral a organisé des événements avec les syndicats, le 27 août à Oakville et le 8 octobre à Vaughan. Alors, Monsieur le Président, est-ce que le gouvernement pourrait donner l'assurance que dans ces 2 cas-là, il n'y a pas eu de financement illégal comme il y a eu le coup d'avant?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
I want to thank the member for the question. I want to thank the member for the question. I want to point out that the case that I'm familiar with was immediately addressed, and we worked with Elections Canada to remedy it. In terms of C4, it's to reestablish fairness and balance, as the members across the way understand.
The Honourable Member for Foothills.
Mr. Speaker, it was immediately addressed because they got caught. Mr. Speaker, the government House Leader said last week when these illegal donations from big unions first came to light, the Liberals followed the letter of the law. That is simply not the case. We have a document from the union itself that states the Prime Minister's own campaign team asked specifically for union members to be props in this this Liberal campaign event. Can the Jobs Minister finally admit that her bill to gut transparency and accountability in a union bill is simply repayment for these illegal campaign contributions?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, as a number of ministers have said, when we became aware of this problem, we immediately contacted Elections Canada. The money was remitted to the Receiver General, which is required under law, and the union involved signed a compliance agreement. But I hope, Mr. Speaker, you might agree with me that it's somewhat ironic for the Conservative Party to be talking about election law compliance. At the end of this event, Mr. Speaker, nobody left in leg irons.
Colleagues. We're going to hear things that are provocative. Sometimes it's hard to respond, not react, but I know that we can do it. Let's restrain ourselves. The member for Foothills has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, they may have paid back the one, but did they pay back the other 2? Mr. Speaker, the Liberals didn't just hold one campaign event, they held maybe at least 3. On August 27th, the Prime Minister held an event with the International Union of Operating Engineers in Oakville. On October 8th, he held an event with the Carpenters District Council in Vaughan. In return for bringing forward a bill that is going to cut accountability and transparency in unions, can the Jobs Minister just say that this is repayment for these illegal campaign contributions?
Honourable Member, Minister of Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to inform the House I want to thank you for the question and inform the House that this was a campaign promise that we were going to look to retract the 2 punitive political bills that were made to specifically attack trade unions. That's the purpose of the bills, and that's what we're following up on. Thank you.
Now the member for Regina Louvain.
Mr. Speaker, thousands of resource workers have been laid off. The latest Statistics Canada report indicates that the monthly percentage jump in employment insurance claims was far higher in Saskatchewan than other provinces. Resource workers and their families need real assistance now. But after years of conservative attacks, our employment insurance system is broken. What concrete changes will the Minister of Employment make to improve the accessibility, level, and duration of employment insurance benefits?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is no doubt in this House that the employment insurance system needs modernizing. This was a commitment of our election promise. We are in the process of doing so. We will soon see immediate changes to parts of the EA system and longer-term systemic changes in the years coming up.
The honourable member for Churchill-Kiwantanuk-Aski.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are struggling, and just telling unemployed workers to hang in there is not going to cut it. Monsieur le Président, les gens qui perdent leur emploi ont besoin de l'aide maintenant, non en 2017. Mais selon le ministre du Développement, il y a quelque chose qui doit attendre. Une réponse qui est inacceptable. La ministre peut-elle confirmer si elle va rétablir le seuil de 360 heures en accès de l'assurance-emploi immédiatement, oui ou non?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member for the question. There were some measures put in that are extremely punitive, including an enormous amount of hours that are directed for new entrants, like young people, or immigrants that can find it very hard to meet those thresholds. It's our intention to move on those provisions extremely quickly.
The Honourable Member for Brampton South.
Mr. Speaker, one of this government's stated priorities is to bring greater openness and transparency to government. An important area in need of review and reform is the supply process, by which the members are able to scrutinize and review government expenditures and hold the government to account. Yet the present process has some important shortcomings. Can the President of the Treasury Board please inform the House of his plans to address this problem?
Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Thank the honourable member for her question. To make Parliament and government more open, transparent and accountable, it's critically important that we reform and realign the estimates and budget process. We want to empower parliamentarians to once again be able to scrutinise spending and to hold government to account. And that's why tonight we invite MPs and senators from all parties to join us for a briefing on the estimates process. We need to have a common understanding of the estimates process today and what it's going to take to fix it and to actually make Parliament work.
The honourable member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, it was bad enough last week when Canada was not invited to the anti-ISIS meeting in Paris. The Liberal government was snubbed because they expect other nations to fight terrorism while they cut and run, taking out our CF-18s without a plan. Then, late last week, the rookie Minister of Defence blamed our allies for the spread of terrorism. Instead of condescendingly lecturing our allies, why doesn't the Defence Minister finally tell us how he will use our military in the fight against ISIS?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, I learned my lessons working with our allies.
And what I said at the speech at the Canada 2020 is when I was actually working with them and learning about the issues that allows radical organizations to take advantage of certain issues and then having to form coalitions after the fact. And what I want to be able to ask the member opposite is, where was their government in looking at those issues? Why did they allow such an issue to get so big and not attack ISIL when it was a small organization? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, we had a plan that was respected by our allies. Last week resembled a blast from the past, a time a former Trudeau government would cozy up to communist regimes and chastise our allies. Last week, the Minister of Foreign Affairs indicated that Canada was going to normalize relations with totalitarian regimes like Iran and Russia. And then on Friday, our rookie Minister of Defense suggested our allies were to blame for all that's wrong in the Middle East and the spread of terrorism. Why are the Liberals lecturing our allies on how to fight terrorism while at the same time befriending Putin and Iran?
Now, the Minister of National Defense.
Mr. Speaker, it's about consulting our allies and having a dialogue. These lessons, as I stated, was learned while working with our coalition partners, and that's the plan that we'll be putting forward, making sure that we get this right so we don't make the mistakes of the previous 10 years. Thank you.
Monsieur le Président, je reviens d'une rencontre de l'Association parlementaire de l'OTAN à Washington et contrairement à ce que raconte le gouvernement, des représentants du Congrès et du département d'État américain regrettaient fortement le retrait de nos avions de combat canadiens en Irak et en Syrie. Alors pourquoi le gouvernement s'entête-t-il à ignorer nos alliés quand c'est le temps de combattre le soi-disant État islamique, Monsieur le Président?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, as we stated, we are committed to ending the airstrikes. However, we have taken the time to making sure that we check the entire situation out. I've visited the region twice. I've spoken with our allies. I've spoken with my counterparts. And when we come out with our plan, it's going to be making sure that we actually have not only a positive impact, but making sure that this is one that's going to impact our allies and have a contribution for years to come. Thank you.
Monsieur le Président, en fin de semaine, 45 personnes ont péri et 110 autres ont été blessées dans un attentat revendiqué par l'État islamique à Damas. Pendant ce temps, le ministre de la Défense nous dit que son plan n'est pas prêt. Peut-on le croire? Monsieur le Président, s'ils ne sont pas capables d'élaborer un plan, pourquoi les Canadiens devraient-ils avoir confiance en ce gouvernement pour assurer leur sécurité?
The Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, we have to make sure that we take our time with this, to making sure that we consult our allies, making sure that we assess what the enemy situation is, and I want to make sure that we do not repeat the mistakes of the past, because every single time we make those mistakes as political leaders, we send our men and women into harm's way for no reason, and I will not repeat those mistakes again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Longueuil-Saint-Hubert.
Monsieur le Président, en campagne électorale, des millions de citoyens ont voté pour dire non à la démolition de Radio-Canada programmée par le Parti conservateur. Après avoir été pendant 10 ans la cible des attaques conservatrices, il est grand temps de donner de l'oxygène à notre diffuseur public. Les libéraux ont fait des promesses, il faut maintenant tenir parole. Or, la ministre du Patrimoine a jusqu'ici évité de confirmer un montant. L'engagement électoral, lui, était pourtant très clair. Alors la question est simple, est-ce que oui ou non, le gouvernement va investir 150 millions dans Radio-Canada tel qu'ils l'ont promis pendant la campagne?
La ministre du Patrimoine.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je tiens à remercier mon honorable collègue pour sa question. En fait, nous avons été élus sur la base d'un programme qui prévoyait un réinvestissement ambitieux dans les arts et la culture. Et nous avons reçu un mandat clair des Canadiens de faire en sorte de livrer ce programme. Merci.
Bravo. Honourable Member for Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
Mr. Speaker, that's not an answer. A promise isn't something you can just say to get yourself elected. Canadians expect this Liberal government to keep its promises. Page 56 of the Liberal platform promises to, quote, reverse Stephen Harper's cuts and invest $150 million in new annual funding. CBC is the cultural spine of this nation, the very essence of Canadian identity. Will the Canadian government keep its promise on CBC? Just one word, yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage.
Mr. Speaker, we strongly believe in the importance of a public broadcaster and a public content creator in this 21st century. And this is why we will reinvest in CBC Radio-Canada, and that's a platform commitment, and we will abide by it. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Banff-Airdrie.
The Minister of Democratic Institutions seems to be confused about the meaning of the word public. While she claims the new Senate Advisory Board appointment process is available online, the entire process is conducted entirely behind closed doors, keeping Canadians completely in the dark. The Advisory Board will meet in secret, provide a non-binding list in secret, and then the Prime Minister may or may not choose a senator from that list, again, in secret. So I ask the Minister, why the secrecy?
The Minister of Democratic Institutions.
Mr. Speaker, an independent, non-partisan advisory board has been established to assess Canadians against a list of public criteria that will allow us to enhance the overall functioning of the Senate. I invite the honourable member to review our website for upcoming details and news.
Yes. Honourable Member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The minister is quoted today in the media as saying that holding a referendum to change the voting system would be doing, and I quote, a disservice to Canadians. Mr. Speaker, in 2007, the Government of Ontario held a referendum on whether to change its voting system to mixed member proportional. So my question to the minister, who, like me, is from Ontario, is simple. In 2007, did she vote in that referendum, or did she regard the referendum as being such a disservice to Ontarians like herself and myself that she withheld her vote as a protest against that entire illegitimate process?
I'm not sure that how someone voted previously is a matter of the responsibility of the government. I think we're going to have to go to the next question from the member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Well, I don't know how fair that was to the minister, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Ontario in 2007, PEI in 2005, BC in 2005 and 2009, the UK in 2011, New Zealand in 92 and 93, when that country voted to adopt mixed member proportional, and then in 2011 when they voted to keep it. Citizens of all these jurisdictions on all these dates were given a referendum on whether to change their voting system. Sometimes they voted yes, sometimes they voted no. Yeah. How would it be a disservice to Canadians to treat us like adults too and submit any new voting system for direct citizen approval and referendum?
Now the Minister of Democratic Institutions.
Mr. Speaker, I would hope that the member opposite would work on his attention to detail when reviewing articles with the minister. Last week, we acknowledged that it wasn't until 100 years ago that some women in Manitoba got the right to vote, a right that would only be extended to Indigenous peoples in 1960. It is in that spirit of evolution and inclusion that we will undertake a process to consult with Canadians in a meaningful and thorough discussion about ways to modernize our democratic institutions.
I know we want to have more and more women parliamentarians in the House of Commons, and it's important that we have a workplace that is civilized. So let's ensure it's not like a 1950s old boys club in here. It's not there anymore. Thanks, I appreciate it, but no thanks. Honorable député de Pierrefonds-Dollard.
Monsieur le Président, la réduction des prix des ressources naturelles a eu un important impact négatif sur l'économie canadienne. C'est lors des moments tels que celui-ci que l'on comprend l'importance d'avoir une économie plus diversifiée. Le ministre de l'Industrie peut-il nous informer des initiatives qu'il entreprend afin de promouvoir de nouvelles industries et de mieux diversifier l'économie canadienne?
Honorable Ministre de l'Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for the question and his hard work on this file.
The government understands the importance of economic diversification, and we have a plan to make it happen, Mr. Speaker. We're committed to a very comprehensive innovation agenda that's focused on startups, scale-ups, and making sure we focus on commercialization. Nowhere is this issue more important in those single resource-based communities that are affected by a changing economy, Mr. Speaker. That is why this government is focused on a growth agenda. That is why this government is focused on an innovation agenda that will create jobs from coast to coast to coast.
The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, this weekend over 80 people were killed by Boko Haram in Nigeria, including a number of children who were burned alive. Canada's Office of Religious Freedom is part of a project in rural Nigeria that created a network of Muslim and Christian leaders who have been working together to reduce this type of violence. These projects are needed now more than ever. So why are the Liberals shutting down the Office of Religious Freedom and once again running away from the fight against radicalization and terrorism?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, Canada deplores Boko Haram's latest atrocities against Nigerians, including innocent and defenseless children. To move to the matter of the Office of Religious Freedom, it's important to understand that the decision has not yet been made. The promotion and protection of human rights, including freedom of religion, of belief, and of conscience, is an integral part of Canada's history and constructive leadership in the world. We are currently examining our options on how best to build on the good work that has been done so far and enhance our efforts to champion peaceful pluralism, respect for diversity, and human rights.
Honorable député de Laurier-Sainte-Marie.
Monsieur le Président, en 2013, le gouvernement conservateur a totalement coupé l'aide canadienne à l'Office de secours et de travaux des Nations unies pour les réfugiés de Palestine. Rappelons que cet office donne de l'aide humanitaire à des gens parmi les plus vulnérables au monde. Et ça contribue notamment à garder sur les bancs de l'école des milliers de jeunes Palestiniens et de jeunes Palestiniennes. Alors, ma question est simple. Est-ce que le ministre va rétablir l'aide canadienne à cet office de secours, oui ou non?
Secrétaire parlementaire au ministre du Développement international.
Merci à ma collègue pour sa excellente question. Of course, our government shares the plight of many people around the world who are suffering, and humanitarian crises have increased dramatically over the past decade. Our minister is currently in the region at the moment to look at how we can better assist those that need it, particularly when we're talking about refugees in Syria and Jordan, and are committed to re-engaging with the region. And as our Prime Minister said, we're back. And we're here to help, and we're looking for new opportunities. Thank you.
Honorable député de Rivière-des-Mille-Îles.
Monsieur le Président, vendredi dernier, j'ai eu la chance de visiter les installations de Novabus à Saint-Eustache. Cette entreprise innovante œuvre dans le secteur du transport en commun et met sur pied présentement un programme d'autobus 100% électriques. Lors de cette rencontre, j'ai pu voir des démonstrations des bienfaits de l'efficacité de tels autobus aux énergies vertes. À l'heure où le Canada démontre son leadership écologique, quel est le plan du gouvernement en ce qui concerne l'électrification des transports en commun? Merci.
Honorable ministre des Transports.
Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais remercier ma collègue de Rivière-des-Mille-Îles pour son excellente question. Notre gouvernement reconnaît que l'utilisation des carburants alternatifs joue un rôle très important dans notre transition vers une économie plus verte. Cela inclut bien sûr les transports collectifs, mais aussi les réseaux de bornes de recharge des véhicules électriques. Ça va jouer un rôle très important. Ça fait partie de l'infrastructure. Ça va aider notre économie. Ça va aider notre environnement. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
L'honorable député de Rivière-du-Nord.
Monsieur le Président, avec les critères des programmes de patrimoine canadien, Ottawa veut dicter l'identité des émissions d'affaires publiques québécoises et Bazo TV en fait les frais. Cette émission d'affaires publiques disparaîtra en raison d'une nouvelle interprétation des critères pour l'obtention du crédit d'impôt fédéral. Pourtant, la formule de l'émission n'a pas changé depuis 10 ans. Monsieur le Président, c'est au programme de s'adapter à la culture québécoise et non le contraire. Nos artisans n'ont pas à se plier en quatre pour rentrer dans les petites cases du ministère. La ministre du Patrimoine s'engage-t-elle à rétablir immédiatement ces crédits d'impôt?
Honorable ministre du Patrimoine.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci à mon collègue pour sa très bonne question. Je suis au courant du dossier. Je tiens à dire que le Bureau de certification a resserré ses critères en juin 2015. Et puis, j'ai été également informée par le Bureau de certification que les émissions qui ont des preuves de production en cours et à venir se verront certifiées. Merci.
L'honorable député de Mirabel.
Monsieur le Président, il y a 18 mois se signait l'accord commercial avec l'Union européenne. Pourtant, nos producteurs n'ont pas vu l'ombre des compensations promises pour éponger leurs pertes. Le ministre du Commerce international qui s'apprête à signer l'accord de partenariat transpacifique soutient que ça ne nous engage à rien. Pourtant, cet accord mettra encore plus en danger la survie de l'industrie laitière du Québec. Avant de signer cet accord, la ministre s'engage-t-elle dès maintenant à compenser pleinement nos producteurs sous gestion de l'offre?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate my honourable colleague's question. The fact is, we certainly support supply management, and we are consulting. Well, we are consulting with the sector. That's what we should do, and that's what we are doing. And we're signing the deal so we can continue to consult with the sector. And we do understand the importance of compensation. Thank you for your question.
The Honourable Member for Saanich, Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to begin by commending the Honourable Minister of Immigration for, I think, quite heroic efforts to put in place a system to welcome Syrian refugees. But that system remains imperfect. That system is, at this point, not responsive to specific situations, such as those who are political dissidents within Syria, who are personally at risk, and who may need fast-tracking to get to safety. I want to ask the Minister if his department and if he will personally consider amending the situation, changing departmental policies so that specific dissidents can get to Canada to safety more quickly.
Minister of Immigration.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my colleague for her strong support on the issue in general, and I would remind her that we have recently launched a Family Link program which seeks to match Canadians wanting to sponsor refugees with Syrian Canadian families whose relatives need help. We're also working on a family unification program for those still in Syria, but I will look into her specific question of today regarding those who are being threatened and what we can do for them.
This will conclude question period.